Good morning, everyone. Connie, can you confirm that you can hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you, Jane.
Thank you. We'll get going in a couple of minutes. Hope everyone's doing well. All right, Connie, I'm going to make a start. Is that okay with you?
Yep.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our regular Churchill webinar. The goal of these webinars is to build awareness in our ongoing audience at Churchill to help you be more effective when you leave here and to take those learnings to your organization, and also to give you insight of how Churchill can help your organization when you're at a place where you need external support. So thank you for joining us. Today, our focus continues on communication, specifically conversations that activate trust for greater collaboration that leads to better business outcomes. So myself, I'm the CEO of Churchill Leadership Group. I'm also a conversational intelligence coach, as well as other coaching certifications. A little on Churchill before we get into the detail. Churchill started back in 2012 for the mission to enable untapped talent to thrive in the corporate and government agency world by improving soft skills and accelerating that improvement by focusing on people's natural talent, their strengths. We do work with our global team of over 200 executive coaches, facilitators, and trainers across the US and Canada, Europe and the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. We usually work with US-based government agencies or corporations that have a global footprint, and companies like that because we can scale. The work that we deliver focuses on three key needs of organizations: helping them at an organizational level, which is really what we're talking about today, the cultural change by using conversations to improve them; greater leadership impact, which again, what we're talking about would impact that; and helping teams perform better. Here are just some of our clients to give you a feel of who we work with. At any point during this webinar, feel free to put comments in the chat box. We'll keep an eye on that, and come off mute and tell us what you think or ask any questions. We're very open to that. My background is I learned to coach about 20 years ago in the corporate world as a leader coach, then went on to be an executive coach. I focus on leadership development and team performance. I love team coaching. I'm a certified strengths coach in Clifton Strengths Finder, as well as Standout. And I'm also certified in conversational tools such as the IQ, conversational intelligence, and brief. Most of my job today is that first point with the client, where we're helping the client think through what's going on with them, the outcome they want, and the best way to get there. And then my job is then to bring in the right Churchill coaches, giving the client a choice to actually deliver the work. So I have a chance to see that very strategic view of client needs, and I want to speak a little to the experience and how it applies today. Not only have I been able to work in different leadership roles across corporate, both in the US and EMEA, I'm trained in conversations, and I have that experience. Like yesterday, I was working with Korea and Japan. Today, I'm working with the US and some of people in London. And that's my daily role. I get to see across cultures, across organizations. And so I start to see trends of things that are happening, what's needed, what's working, etc. So that's the value that I'm able to bring to you today. We also have one of Churchill's fabulous leadership team members with us. She's our marketing director and a certified analytical expert. Connie, can you say hello to our audience, please?
Yes, hello everyone. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Jane.
You're welcome. And I can't make these webinars happen without you. I'm just not organized enough. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with a poll. Connie's in charge of the poll. And the one thing I want to ask you first is, have you in your experience ever experienced a toxic culture in the workplace? Let's see what you will say. All right, we can end the poll. Thank you, Connie. It sounds like the majority of people have. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is, what did that feel like for you? And maybe pop something in the chat box, 1 or 2 words. What did a toxic culture feel like for you? Let's see what you pop in the chat. Disheartening? Yeah. I know for me, I have experienced it a lot less than I've experienced good cultures, but it was scary. It was unnerving. I questioned sort of why I was here and the type where I wanted to be. It's quite, it can freeze you. Don't feel valued, yes. And thank you for that, Neil. When you think about how much time we spend at work, do we need to be in a place where we're not valued? So let's take a look at culture and how it relates to conversations. So when we think of culture, I like to think in simple terms so I can explain it clearly. Culture is, how does it feel like, what does it feel like to work around here? And you can have different cultures in one large organization depending on what part of the organization you're in, and culture can change. So in general, it depends on what it feels, it's what it feels like to work around here. And of course, that is governed by the relationships that you're in at work, your boss, your boss's boss, your peers, their bosses, the people that you work with, internally, externally, the people that report to you. So the relationships you have with these people make a huge difference on culture. And then, of course, the type of conversations you have with those people are critical. So it starts at the conversation level, and the type and quality of conversations we have lead to relationships which build the culture. Culture doesn't happen because we put something on a website, as we all know. So that's why we're focusing on conversations. And what wraps around the relationship and the conversations is trust. We'll talk a lot about trust today. So here's why we're here. 87% of leaders believe the quality of their culture is important. That's a good thing, right? Leaders know it's important. Your C-suite get it. But only 28% understand their current culture well. They're in this bubble at the top of the organization, may not know what it feels like at the middle level or the first line level, may not know what the culture feels like to your customers, shock horror, and even then, executives don't believe we have the right culture. Only 19% do. So culture needs to change, and we'll talk a little later about why it needs to change, what's going on in our environment. We also know from MIT research that 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. We're having lots of conversations every day. Imagine how many you're having: conference calls, one-on-ones, conversations with peers, meetings you're in, emails. These are all conversations. 9 out of 10 aren't as effective as they need to be. And we know that on teams, if the conversations are higher quality, it's 50% of the difference between low and high performing teams. So if we want to accelerate the performance of teams, we have to help them have better conversations. And of course, all of this leads to employees leaving a bad culture, which ultimately is felt more from their boss. So that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about this. And I want to give credit to Judith Glacier, the late Judith Glacier. Unfortunately, we lost her just over a year ago, who wrote this book and had 40 years of research behind it on conversational intelligence. It's a great read, pretty practical as well. And some of what we talk about today will introduce you to conversational intelligence. Conversational intelligence is the intelligence we use in the conversations we have with others. The words we use in recognizing the impact we have on the other person and vice versa. Different to emotional intelligence, where we're hearing and understand the emotions we're feeling and being positively in control of them and picking up on the emotions of others. And then, of course, IQ, intelligence quota, is our ability to take in and process information. So now you have conversational intelligence, and it matters. All right, so why now? We've touched on this. I have been in 2 conversations in the last week at a very senior level, GM, CEO level, where they want to shift from a hierarchical structure and culture to more of a matrix. So many of you might be working in organizations where it's a very matrixed organization, where not only is it important to work as an effective team, the teams have to work across divisions, across countries, across regions, across cultures, up, across, down, all different directions. And so our leadership has to switch from being more directive to more empowering. We do a lot of work to help leaders build a coaching culture and capability. In fact, I was up in Canada at a conference speaking on that this week with a global audience. Big need. That's why we're talking about it now, because of this shift. We also know, all of us, the world we live in, humans want to bond. They want to talk, they want to be heard, they want to be responded to, they want to be in conversations. We only have to look at social media. So again, improving those conversations is important. And when conversational intelligence started to really break into the corporate world back in 2006, well, actually earlier than that, because by 2006, Inc. magazine is saying this is one of the biggest new trends that are important for corporations. So one way to think about conversational intelligence is building trust at work. And I'll share more about that in just a moment. So let's reinforce. Most of you, well, many of you might have read the book, The Speed of Trust. It's one of my favorites. And here's a quote from Stephen Covey. Trust is critical in our conversations. And conversational intelligence builds how to have conversations by building trust. And of course, we also know from Covey that trust drives business performance as well. We can have great strategy, we can execute on it, but we can only do that if there's high levels of trust across the organization to be able to work together. All right, so what are the common symptoms that you see in your organization when there's low trust? Let's use the chat room there. When you sense there's low trust, what are some examples of what you see? No communication. Thank you, Emma. People shut down. Yeah, probably one of the biggest ones, I think. Gossip. Yes. We start to hear things go off on tangents, gossip spreads, hiding problems, the elephant in the room, we're not talking about it, right? Because it's too scary, because I don't trust you. If I start talking about it or say the obvious, what we need to focus on, there might be consequences to me. We see that a lot as well. So here's some of just in the last few months we've heard from clients. I'll give you a moment to read. So you can see there's this trends in conversations between a people manager and their people, definitely conversations amongst peers, senior leader conversations and how they're perceived, as well as cross borders, cultures, divisions, where we think we're aligned, but we're not. We're sort of talking from different parts of the world. So this is the shift that we need to make. If I was to summarize the shift we need to make in a couple of points, this is it. When we're in a low conversational intelligence environment, and CIQ stands for conversational intelligence, conversations tend to be about me, what I need. I'm on a project team, it's what I need. I go to my team as their leader, and it's what I want us to do. It's very much I-driven. It causes us to then back off when we're in that environment because we don't feel valued. We're scared about what might happen. We think there's risk involved. It might be painful because really I'm not part of it. It's all about you. And that reduces trust and can shut us up, causes roadblocks in moving the business forward, the execution, creates conflict, right? You're telling me what to do or implying what I should do, but I'm not feeling heard and I've got other priorities. So we start to conflict, happens all the time on teams, and leads to delays and frustration. If we work with a leader, a team, or an organization and help them recognize this, and there's multiple ways to do that, including assessments and exercises, we help them improve their conversational intelligence, then we start to see we conversations, more collaborative conversations where innovation takes place, where trust starts to rise so we open up more with each other instead of shutting off communication, get more ideas on the table, explore those ideas, avoid assumptions because we're curious, and we start to understand each other's reality, desired outcomes, can work on collective outcomes and speed up our work and produce more. That's the shift. That's the shift we need, and that's the shift typically we're working towards with customers. If you've got any thoughts how this is landing, let us know on chat. Feel free to come off and talk to us. So we've talked a little about the challenge and consequences. I want to give you a couple of solutions to give you a feel of some of the work that we do with clients, but also to give you some sort of quick wins that you can take away yourself. And then we'll talk a little about how Churchill can help you, and that will just take a minute or two at the end. So let me just do a time check here. We're on time. Any thoughts from you, Connie? Just want to check in there.
I'm good. I am curious to hear what you have to share. Keep going.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I have to be transparent. This was a hard webinar to prepare for because when it comes to communication and trust and improving that, to improve our culture and results, you can imagine what could be covered. It could be a series of 12 webinars. And then when I looked at all the tools that Churchill uses in terms of what we put in learning experiences, what we use in executive coaching, what we use in team development programs, what we use in manager effectiveness programs, there was so much I could share with you that I struggled to prioritize, I have to be honest. But I've chosen a couple that I think can get you thinking, build your own self-awareness and get you thinking that when you leave here will help you improve your conversations, but also I think hopefully will help you recognize how they might work on a bigger scale with people in your organization. These are some of the tools that I considered and decided to leave out. Again, there are only, 7 here. I could have put 77 on the screen. Multiple of them have a similar outcome, work on a similar symptom, but there's a different way of doing it. So we tailor them to the audience. All of them are focused on improving conversations, trust, relationships, and culture. So I chose 3. I hope these 3 work for you. The first one is making the invisible visible. Again, there are multiple ways we do that, from getting leaders to be curious and not make assumptions and double click and ask more powerful questions in conversations to really surface what's going on between 2 people or on a team. We're not talking about that visibility right now. We're talking about the neuroscience. I think Steve is on the line. And Steve, I think from our recent conversations, you're a love of the neuroscience as well. Is that correct? Not sure if you can come off mute, if the system lets you, or you can chat to us. Steve, I'm going to keep this at a fairly high level to make sure I don't lose people. Feel free to jump in and add. I'm always keen to hear the expertise on the line. Okay, so here's the human brain, all right, with me so far. What happens when we're in conversations with another person and we feel judged, or we feel marginalized, or we feel criticized, or we don't feel valued, which happens? I'm sure most of you can think of a time that's happened in the last week in some sort. What happens is we build cortisol in our body. It's a neurochemical. I love this because I've got a degree in chemistry, so fascinated by the neurochemistry. And what happens is this floods our body. And what it does, it shuts down the part of our brain at the front called the prefrontal cortex. And that's the brain we need to use to be our best at work. It helps us think more clearly. It helps us to think strategically. It helps us make decisions. It helps us move forward. And when people talk to us in a way of judgment and criticism, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that constructive feedback is not important. It is. We've all got blind spots and need to hear it, but it's how we have those conversations. We shut this part of the brain down. We shut our ability to be at our best down. Instead, we trigger the amygdala, the primitive brain at the back here. We call it the amygdala hijack, right? Fight, flight, etc. We shut down. We go in protection mode. And guess what? There's not a lot we can do about it because that is the way as humans were built. We were built that way many years ago when there were dinosaurs around the corner that would come around and eat us. Well, we don't have to deal with that. We do have to deal with it at work. And so cortisol has a long half-life, which means it stays around in our body, flooding our body, feeling this way for 26 hours or more a day. So typically, if you've been in a bad conversation one day and you're getting up and getting ready for work the next day and you're in the shower, you're probably still thinking about it because it's still flooding around in your body. And that conversation reduces trust between two people, creates unhealthy connections, unhealthy culture. There are ways to have constructive feedback with people in a way that can still build oxytocin. And this is what we teach leaders. Oxytocin is a neurochemical that comes into our body when we get positive feedback, when we feel valued, when we feel heard and understood, when we feel our voice matters, when we feel connected to other people, when we feel included. That's why a lot of work companies do, and we do with diversity and inclusion, is so important. It builds oxytocin. And the good thing is oxytocin opens up this prefrontal cortex. So if I want to get the best out of my team members, or even in my conversation with my boss, I want his or her prefrontal cortex working. And it builds trust in the relationship and leads to healthy connections. So audience, is this resonating? Does it make sense? Let me know. Connie, what about you? Did that make sense?
Yes, made sense to me.
Steve loves the brain science. Steve, is there anything you would like to add? Just looking here if I can take Steve off mute, if you'd like to add anything. Allowed to talk. You're unmuted, Steve. If there's anything you would like, I want you to feel pressured.
Just a second. Let me get my headphone plugged in.
Yeah, take your time. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for confirming this made sense.
So as you and I have discussed before, one of the other things we have to realize is that the brain has a filtering system called the reticular activating system. And if we're not getting our point across to people very, very quickly, like in the first 15 to 30 seconds, the brain shuts down or filters us out because it's on to more interesting things. So we not only have to look at this area of trust and the ability to get on the good side of the prefrontal cortex, we also have to look at just plain old getting through the filtering mechanism, the RAS, with our conversational skills. And that means practices of succinct, clear ability to speak human.
Love it. Remind people what RAS stands for, please, Steve. Reticular
Activating System. And it is also tied into, I think, areas of the amygdala. It's part of the fight and flight syndrome, as well as sleep regulation. So the RAS is looking for whatever is new and interesting and relevant and surprising. And what it does is it kind of throws away all the background stuff that's the same, so that we can see the new threats. I mean, here's the dinosaur coming around the corner. So there's the pattern matching aspect, that we will filter out all the other things we know are stable and still there, and we will pay attention to the thing that's new, because it could be a problem.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I always describe myself at times having squirrel syndrome, that new shiny. So that resonates with me a little as well. And the webinar that we did last month, September, was all about what you're talking about, the ability to be clear, concise, get to the point. So that resonates beautifully. We did not mention it was due to the RAS. So thank you for adding your wisdom to the group here. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to put you back on mute unless there's anything else you would like to add.
No, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, excellent. Love it when we take it to that next level.
Jane?
Yeah, hey, Connie.
Yep, we have a question from Enma. She wants to know how, in the real world, does one handle negative feedback?
Tell us a little more, Enma. Is it receiving the feedback or is it giving the feedback? Giving. Okay, great. Yeah, so one of the tips that we use when we do our Leader as Great Coach program with clients, which is really helping their leaders know how to coach, and a subset of that is in giving feedback, right? And so we've for many, many years, the word feedback has become a scary word. Can I give you some feedback? Oh no, what's coming? I'm gonna melt, right? It's got this visceral reaction. And so we have to do it. We owe it to people. If I was working with someone on my team and they kept interrupting people in all of our team meetings, I'm not doing them a service unless I bring that to their attention. I have to give them that feedback. So one way we recommend managers to do it, and even peers, is to use observations versus judgment. Use actual practical situations and not layer on your opinion or your judgment. And it might sound something like, Enma, I've noted, well, I would open it up with something a little more that shows I care about you. Enma, can I have a couple of minutes? I want to have a conversation with you, which I hope will help you have a greater impact in our meetings. I've noticed, and I've been watching now for a couple of meetings, that on multiple occasions, you jumped in and interrupted the person before they'd finished their train of thought. Did you realize that was happening? And most of the time in that situation, Enma may not realize it was happening. I wanted to bring this to your attention because I've also noticed that that person's reaction, they didn't seem to like it. And I'm suspecting that you're jumping in out of enthusiasm, but I don't want to make any assumptions. What do you think? Right, and I might then spend time just purely listening to what they're saying. Chances are in that situation, they didn't know what they were doing it was coming from a place of good intent, but was having a negative impact, and that person would probably, not always, be grateful for getting it, and I would work with them to practice another way of bringing that enthusiasm to the table. Does that help at all, Enma? All right, cool. Great question. It is important. There is a book I'd recommend. It's called Radical Candor. It's all about giving constructive feedback, but at the same time showing you care. So another way in that situation, I would be showing how I can help this individual make the change, following up with them, totally being there for them, giving them positive feedback as they improve. Like, I really want to show that I care about the individual's success. Radical Candor. All right, thank you. All right, number 2. So making the invisible visible was number 1, and we did that looking at the neuroscience. So let me just go back to that a second. Knowing that this goes on in your body, it can change the way we behave. But of course, most of the leaders in your organization don't know this is going on in their body. We can't see it, we haven't learned it, we can feel it, but we can't put words to those feelings, right? That's the emotional intelligence. So when we teach leaders this, especially scientists and engineers, it gives them the logic behind it. And once they know that, they can start to change their behavior. It builds awareness and it builds a desire for change. It's hugely valuable. And often we go deeper. Some coaches go really deep on the neuroscience. So that's why that's important. It builds awareness and desire. Another way to build awareness and desire is recognizing the type of conversation we're in. And we want to move from to we. So I'm going to share, but the reality of today is the conversations we're in is it's all me. I'm going in a meeting trying to get what I want from that meeting, but everyone else is going into the meeting doing the same thing. So we're not always aligned. We think we are, but we're not. Some of the team coaching work we do, in fact, I was on a call before this call. Alignment is one of the 14 factors of team performance. And alignment really is a huge difference between teams that are super successful, have really high true alignment, and teams that are not successful think they're aligned, but they're not. And so often team meetings or team across matrix team meetings, we think we're on the same page, we're not, and it's all about me. Or then we get frustrated with people and you're not saying what I'm trying to tell you and I keep at you. I'll repeat myself, I'll talk louder, I'll try it from another angle. I'm all about trying to persuade you to come to my side of the view. So subliminally, I'm saying, why aren't you seeing it? You crazy person, you need to see my point of view. These are the type of conversations that we're in, and often we don't even realize it. So I want to build a realization and awareness of the types of conversations. Again, this comes from conversational intelligence. Level 1 are those transactional conversations where we tell. Now, there are times where this is valuable. Okay, Connie, can you hear me? Well, that's not a good idea. That's not,
Yes.
I've just given an example here, right? So, Connie, make sure you can hear me, let me know, right? A better example might be I go to my boss and say, how much vacation have I got this year? And my boss will say, Jane, you've got 6 weeks vacation, right? It's a transactional conversation and that is fine, right? But most conversations in business need more than that in order to move the needle forward. A lot of conversations are in this space of selling. I'm trying to convince you to come my way. You're trying to convince me to do the other. So we're both at it like this, or I'm pushing so hard that you're backing off and you're nodding. And I'm thinking you're nodding means you agree, you're on board. And I'm like, I'm nodding to get out of here. You're talking a load of blah, blah, blah. I don't believe what you're saying. Right? We hear that all the time. I hear that from leaders all the time. We left a team meeting, everyone was on board and nothing happened. And I'll say to the leader, why do you think they're on board? Well, everyone was nodding. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, it means they're on board. I'm like, what else could it mean? Well, it means they're just nodding. I'm like, yes, right? They might be nodding that they think what you're saying is crazy and they're agreeing with each other. We can't make that assumption. But that's what happens when we're in sell mode, level 2. Again, at times, it might be valuable. But most conversations in business, most business occurs through collaboration. We need multiple brains solving to move us forward to a result. Solving client issues, helping us lead the team towards the vision, helping us solve this problem that's getting in our way quickly. We need multiple brains. That's why organizations are full of teams, lots of types of teams, leadership teams, cross-functional teams, cultural teams, teams across levels, project teams, everything. And we need to get more conversations to this level 3 where we're in co-creation, we're sharing and we're discovering, we're curious about what others have to say and their ideas and how they may be different to ours, and stopping assumptions. so that we can transform results. I hope this makes sense. So the first thing I would ask you to take away from today is recognize, particularly when you're in important conversations, are you in tell or sell mode, or are you really opening up to co-creation? Starts with us first, right? So we have to recognize what we're causing. Another way is to observe a meeting and see what's going on. Is everyone selling their own ideas? Or are we slowing down enough and going deeper to get into that co-creation transformation type of conversation that really will move the needle? Most of what I see, we're in level 2. I'll tell you a story a little later. But I wanted to give you a chance to do a reflection. We still have time to do this. And you can do this in your own mind. Reflect on a conversation you were in recently. How would you describe that conversation in your own words? You can just jot something down on a piece of paper. Now that you know these levels of conversation, what level do you think you were in? Tell, sell, or co-create? What was the outcome? And how are you feeling about it on reflection? I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Connie, I'm going to ask you to be my guinea pig.
Sure.
Can you think of a recent conversation you were in where you're able to share with the audience your responses to these 4? You don't have to share the details of the conversation.
Sure.
All
Definitely.
right. Just hold off for a minute. I want people to time to do the exercise, and I'll call you back in about 40 seconds.
Okay.
Just put my timer on. So Connie, let me come back to you. How would you describe the conversation that you reflected on?
Yes, so I actually am reflecting on a conversation we had earlier today, you and I. We were discussing some marketing activities that we want to put in place. And should I move on to question 2?
Yep, take it just in your own time, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like it was a combination of 2 and 3. I was, and you actually said I'm sold. If I were to quote you, I was putting some ideas out and you said, okay, I'm sold. So I feel like we're definitely in the sell there. But there was co-creation in that we were looking to evolve the methods that we're using now, and we came to the conclusion that we need to do some planning out into the future. And I feel very good about it because it gives me some direction, and I feel like I was completely heard and understood.
Excellent. Thank you, Connie, for sharing. It's really that simple to reflect on your conversations. And one of the things I often look for when I'm observing customers or I'm in conversations is who's doing all the talking. Very often, if you're in a conversation where one person's doing all the talking or a meeting, then you're very much in sell mode. And so that's a sign for yourself or a sign for leaders in your organization that there's a better way. One of the other tools, and I'm not going to walk you through this in any depth because you really have to practice using it, but one of the tools we use with customers is this conversational dashboard, and it's a measurement tool. And at any point when we're practicing conversations, we can recognize where we are. What was the reaction of the other person? Were they more in resistance mode? Were they more of a wait and see mode? And once you sort of know this and can practice it almost subconsciously in your mind, you sort of recognize where the trust is in the relationship, and you can adjust your conversation. Maybe if I'm seeing someone that is more skeptical in conversations with them, that's my key to probably shut up and ask some powerful questions and give them, say something like, okay, so what's going through your mind right now? And I might hear fear and say, tell me more about that, versus me just keep going. So this really helps leaders measure their impact. Third thing I want to touch on, and I am going to do it briefly, is assumptions. Assumptions are important when we do strategic planning. We have to put certain assumptions in place to place our bets, to create the plan. Business assumptions are really important, and we need to keep testing assumptions. But the assumptions that I'm talking about is when we assume about another person. We assume they did that on purpose. We assume they didn't do that because they're lazy. We assume they didn't do that because they don't care. They said they'd do it because they nodded at us, and we assume they're not responsible because they didn't do it. We assume the nod meant a full commitment. Happens all the time, leads to conflict, leads to stalling in the business. Execution doesn't happen because we've made assumptions, and we all do it. Right? We get accused. We believe what he sees is what I see. And in reality, they see through a totally different lens. So again, this is something that we help leaders become more aware of so that they can prevent making wrong assumptions and get into more productive conversations that build trust, put the reality on the table, and look at that reality to figure out how to move forward together better. It's brilliant for sales teams. It's brilliant for team meetings, etc. I think I just saw a hand raise. Steve, I'm going to take you off mute.
This is something near and dear to my heart because for two reasons. One is what Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker called the curse of knowledge, where we assume certain things, and we assume people know them and see them the way we do. And then we will assume that we're actually communicating when we're not. And the other is what I call, related to that, is called the mental metadata problem, where we have different definitions and experiences in our minds so that we can use certain words and we think everybody else is using or thinking the same way with those words, but we're not. So one of my favorite phrases to use in trying to deal with this is the phrase, and what I mean by that is, because we should never, ever assume that people actually understand our meaning, even if they understand our words.
Superb, superb. And that alignment call I was just on for our team coaching work that we do, that's exactly what they talked about, is don't assume the word means the same to other people. Describe it. I had a mentor when I first moved here. I lived in New Jersey. I was still in the pharmaceutical world, and he was from Merck, and he would say to me and my colleagues, Jane, describe it. He would go like this. He'd get really agitated. Jane, describe it like I could see it on a TV screen. Right? and at the time I was like, he's mad. What is this man about? And then gradually I got it, right? I was like, I've got to describe it so people can, what I mean by that is, yeah, thank you, Steve. Great tip there for me and your peers. Another thing I will do if someone says a word and I don't understand it is, well, what would that look like if we did it? It's really good as well if you're getting feedback, whether it's positive or constructive, and your boss says you've got to do more of X or you've got to stop doing Y. I might say, thank you so much for that feedback. I would love to do that. Help me get more clarity. If I did what you're suggesting, what would it look like? What would you see me do? So again, I've got clarity to help me move forward. So 2 tips there. Steve, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. So one of the tools we use in helping leaders and teams reduce assumptions is a ladder of conclusion. And this sort of pulls together what we were talking about earlier, the bioreaction. So we're in conversations, and this neurochemical is happening with the cortisol and the oxytocin, and that's causing feelings in us in the conversation, although we may not be noticing it. That leads to thoughts, it triggers our beliefs. And someone will say something, and we put a meaning to it that isn't real. They meant something else, we're putting more meaning to it, and we're adding interpretations and making assumptions. So we might leave a conversation and think we're aligned, and we're leaving a conversation, I'm on this road and you're on this road. And so we come to all these conclusions that aren't correct, but we don't pressure test the assumptions, right? We assume, we go up this ladder, and then we fall down, which means we don't actually achieve, we fail, we fall in terms of achieving the result we want. So when people understand what gets us there, we then help leaders understand how to prevent getting up that confusion ladder and find better ways of having conversations. So again, it's another tool that allows us to see how we're creating meaning and usually mismeaning based on just our own point of view, and getting out on the table and discussing it together, broaden our understanding by understanding what the other person really meant and what they're thinking, so that we can come together to understand how to move together forward with mutual success. So can you start to understand how conversational intelligence, which builds trust, helps us have these collaborative conversations on teams better than we're having today? I'll go back to that quote I just skipped over because I think it's so cool. It probably takes twice to read it. I love that quote. All right, so let's wrap up here. Quick story. So one of the examples I want to share with you, I was working with conversational intelligence with a large group of CEOs or CXOs, CTOs, CIOs, CFOs, introducing them to the importance of trust in their conversations and inserting some conversational intelligence work. And there were some commonalities. They recognized, for example, in their team meetings that they were doing most of the talking, that they were exhausted, they weren't getting the type of execution and commitment from their teams that they would like. And I want to give you an example of one of the leaders that I continue to work with as a coach for him and his team. For him, he really felt that most of his meetings, it was his game, like it was his dog and pony show, and he had 90% of the responsibility and did most of the talking. But it really wasn't working for him, and it was exhausting, and it wasn't working for his business. So he recognized that as soon as he talked, even if there were ideas or suggestions, what his people heard was, he's the boss, that's the direction, that's what we need to do. He was never asking what their ideas were. So one of the tips that he started working on was didn't put ideas out there because people were seeing them as direction and what they had to do, was instead stop doing the talking and just put the problem on the table and ask the team to discuss and weigh in why he observed. He looked for things. He looked for things where people would shout down each other's ideas and ask them to pause and notice that and to keep being open to each other's ideas. He continued to observe instead of doing all the talking. What he found came out of it were lots of ideas that he hadn't even thought of. What he also saw from it, that people were bought into those ideas because they were their ideas. And so we continued to work on how the team could make decisions based on those ideas. How could they choose the idea to go on and make sure everyone was involved? And that was another piece of our work over time. But he recognized that leaders sometimes need to go last, that the magic is in the team, and with high conversational intelligence and creating an environment that empowers others, results got better, alignment improved, and the level of commitment got stronger. Just one of many examples that I could share. And it was because he realized what was going on with the neurochemistry. He realized that he was in a tell-cell communication, and he was recognizing he was making all these assumptions about the people on his team that they needed to be told. He turned up his conversational intelligence, and with it, commitment and results. Okay, final thoughts, questions. Feel free to push back on me. Feel free to share other ideas like Steve's done a great job of doing today. Thank you again, Steve. Anything else you'd like to share, participants? You're welcome, Enma. Connie, any thoughts from you?
Nothing from me. We have a question from Neil. He wants to know, how long does it take to turn a culture around?
Ooh, that's a really good one. It's a tough one, Neil. Thanks for asking. I would say, depending on the size of the organization and depending how big the change is, a year to 3 years. For big global organizations, it might take even longer, but I typically in big global organizations, there's an overall desire for culture change, and then it's regionalized, so work goes on at regions, which speeds it up. Like, I'll give you an example, like at eBay, we've been working with them for 4 years to build a coaching culture and coaching capability. And that culture change in the US could move somewhat faster because the thought of coaching wasn't new to, the idea of coaching wasn't new to US leaders. But in Korea, it was a brand new concept. It was very directive, hierarchical. So that culture change took a bit longer, and we changed the how we did it, which actually speeded it up more than we could imagine. We were talking about this weekend, this last weekend at the conference in Canada, our Korean coach came over to talk to the audience about that. And so it depends. It's a big part of change management. I'm a ProSci certified coach, which is change management expertise. And so I think when you're turning culture around, you have to have change experts and know what works for change. But I would say 1 to 3 years. I hope that helps you. That helps a little, Neil. That's an organization. A team culture could be done a lot quicker, of course. But then that team lives within the bigger culture, and if that bigger culture is still toxic, it might help that team struggle to sustain the new culture. You're welcome. You're great. Great quote there, Steve. Thank you. All right. Let me just wrap up here. How Churchill helps you. Everything we've talked about changing culture, increasing trust through conversational intelligence and better conversations. We have assessments to measure that, which is important, especially for executives. They want to know the facts, both as baseline and then are we improving? We do it in one-on-one executive coaching. We do it in team coaching and in leadership development programs, such as Manager 101, 1.0, 2.0 leadership development. So we weave conversational intelligence into the programs that we do. The programs are based on the outcome, the change that you want. So they're tailored. There's so much we can build into them. If you need more, such as a one-on-one conversation with me to talk about your unique need, for business leaders, for HR leaders, we offer that free time with me. Just email us and say, hey, this is my role in the organization. I want 30 minutes with Jane. And we'll have a conversation all about you and your need. Next month, we're going to be talking about how to reduce conversational blind spots. Please join us for that. We'll explore multiple blind spots and what you can do about them in terms of noticing them, identifying them, giving people feedback, and changing them if it's one of your blind spots. December 10th, same time, 12 Eastern. So in summary, culture is caused by the quality of relationships, which is dependent on the quality of your conversations, and they need to be steeped in trust. Cultures need to change because our environment is changing. What millennials want from a culture is different to what different generations want culture, and conversations are failing. We need to build awareness first for change to happen. We have to build awareness of the neuroscience, the level of conversations we're having and the impact of that in order to move forward. So usually that's the typical first part of change: awareness, build desire. Avoid assumptions. And if you need support to accelerate your success, call Churchill. I'm going to end on one thing here. I was on a Dan Pink call yesterday, big fan of author Dan Pink, his books, he does a lot of research. And some research he shared is that rhyming matters in terms of us remembering things and for things to stick. So I'm going to get a bit cheesy here. Connie was laughing at me. Here's my rhyme. Trust is a must. Please take that away with you. And thank you very much for joining us. See you next time.